So now I'm going to dive into a few more practical issues. I'm hoping sort of you sort of saw, in general what types are and what states are and sort of how they work and how they might interact a little bit there. So now I'm going to sort of try to drive into a little bit more about, well, how do we come up with these, and how do we think about them, and how do we move forward in these things in the first place. So I'm just going to run through really quickly. These are the general steps that services has been following, and I'm just going to give you. But then what we're as Carol said, we're trying to make it so that especially the business analysts can actually take more ownership of this kind of stuff. And so what we're going to be doing is walking through that. But I just want to just quickly, because I think it gives you a quick bird's eye view, is that from the service team, when we're actually designing these things, we design the objects first, and we design we come up with the entity diagrams for them, and we say these are the things that people are manipulating in the system. And once we get that done, we then start looking at example data, and this is how we've been doing it. We look at example data. We look at, for states, we look at the process diagrams that have been posted, often, sort of in the requirements gathering phase. There are a lot of process diagrams, and you can sort of then see where things are controlled. You look for words. There are certain key words you might look at, and you sort of review them, and you sort of translate them into proposed types and states. And we've been putting them on the wiki, and then what we've been doing is reviewing them. But I think what we've done is we've sort of pulled people together and said, "Do these look good?" And they sort of didn't feel like well, they can sort of maybe quibble about certain wordings and stuff, but didn't really sort of understand the full context of them. So this is when we're trying to change it. But at least we would review them with people, and then we would have to actually translate them from the wiki into artifacts that the programmers can actually use, because then they have to be operational somehow within the system. And then we would release them formally with the contract to the parallel development team for them to actually use when building their application. So that's been our general policy. I'm actually going to switch to this, and this is something that Carol and I have been sort of working on. I'm trying to come up with another, a more joint process for putting these things together. And so,
hey Norm, can you bump up your size a little? Control plus a few times.
Oh, sure. Control. Is that good?
One more. One more.
One more. Okay. Control plus.
And then maybe close your side panel too.
How do you do that? Okay.
Thank you, Norm. Perfect. That's good.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. So what again, this is something that Carol feel free to jump in as I'm going here. If you want to sort of talk, that's absolutely fine. We're trying to define more clear steps and sort of who's got ownership of some of those steps. But again, just starting off from a services standpoint, we would still build the entity diagrams and say these are the objects we think are in the system. But then, it's at a certain point when we think we've got some things quasi-solidified, we would say, hey, we need some help from you all to actually start designing some of these.
I would suggest two things. I would suggest we start with a process flow.
Okay.
And then back up to general steps. And then also to highlight that we really have two main processes here. We've got what we're calling a definition process, which is primarily under the purview of the core team, and that is to get types and states defined prior to PDT handoff. Then there's what we're calling the change process, which is what's going to happen once the service is released to PDTs and types and states need updating. So first, I think we'll walk through the definition process so you understand how we're going to go about defining these things. And then I think, particularly for the PDT VAs, you'll be very interested in the change process because that's the one that you'll be working with primarily.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, all right, good. Then I'll do the definition process first. And is that okay? And
yep,
pick
yes,
up.
that'd be great.
Excellent. Nope, I agree. That makes sense. So again, still the services team here would sort of initiate it, and we get to a point where we think we now are ready for having types and states defined for these objects that we've been sort of thinking that are going to be manipulated, and we would sort of invite in the people from the core team the BAs from the core team to actually go through that process and actually come up with them and draft up the types and states that that they see should be released as part of the contract. And so the idea here is to fire off a JIRA is the first thing. Then we get people involved, and they would actually draft some types and states and work through them, and then post them up. And there are different statuses we've talked about. And this is weird using the word statuses for tracking the types and states, but we're talking about having statuses that sort of manage where these types and states are in the definition process. And the reason why we have to do that is that it's really been confusing to date. We have some out in the wiki. We don't know yet. We don't know who's looked at it, who has approved it, and it's been some confusion on that. We're hoping to. Whoops, oh, wait. Oh no. Okay.
Sorry.
So the idea here is you can sort of see what we sort of see as sort of the valid statuses that might exist sort of in that state. And so the idea is that typically they'd be in draft or they may have been pre-configured during course management part of the project, and so we already know what the types and states were that were used then. And so we don't want to willy-nilly just throw them overboard. And similarly, we have some types and states that were defined during course life. And again, it doesn't mean that we have to live with them completely, but we don't want to just sort of throw them overboard because there's been a certain amount of code and business logic written around them already. So we want to sort of make sure that we review them and make sure they make sense for us as we move forward. And so the idea is to actually come up with them and to post them in a particular place where the core team could then sort of review them and sort of make sure that they make sense, and from their standpoint that it captures all of the business distinctions that we need to make within the processes and to support the processes for the parallel development teams that we can think of. Again, we're going to be doing this hopefully fairly fast, and therefore getting it out the door, and it's sure we're going to be making some mistakes, but at least we get something out the door. But then what we would do is actually make that decision to say, okay, which ones are we going to actually release for parallel development, because we may get a whole list of them, but only release a few of them because it's only a handful of them that are actually needed for that next iteration of work that we're doing during that next milestone work or whatever the parallel development team is focusing on. And so we would document them, and we would actually then put them, and this is what the configured means, it's actually put into the source code tree, put into so the developers can actually begin to start using them and using them in the code. And if so, then we would sort of mark them eventually. We would document them and whatnot as approved, and then eventually we would hopefully release them with the service contracts when we release them. So you go decide, document them, configure them, verify that they've actually been configured properly, because that's also been an issue we had, and then sort of resolve the JIRA when we're done, and then communicate to everyone that these are the types and states, this is what they're doing, and this is how they work, and that's should be communicated to the parallel development team as part of that handoff process. And so again, the big change here is that sort of this whole stream of work used to be just sort of done by the services with a brief, quick check with sort of the core team saying, hey, do these look good to you? Okay, good. Let's go out the door and push them out. So what we're trying to do here now is instead is sort of this is actually work that can be done and should be done, I think, by the business analysts. And so I think if we do this right, we can get it done well by the right people. So then once it's been handed off to the parallel development team, they're marked as, they would have the type as configured, that they're in this system, but they're not necessarily approved and not necessarily used by, we're not necessarily going to continue using them because the parallel development team may get in there and say, you only have one type here, but we need to make two distinctions in this situation, and this is what we're finding. And so we'll have to go back and maybe create two types that split the two ideas in different things, or vice versa, maybe combine some together or add new ones or add new groupings or whatever. So the change process starts instead with the parallel development team sort of recognizing that there's a sort of a problem that they have, that the types and states that were released to them aren't working for them. And so the idea here is that you would take the types and states, you would sort of propose new ones, you put them in as sort of a draft mode, and then you would initiate a change process by filing a JIRA saying, these are the ones that we think we need here. And then that process should go through, the review process by the core team, but, in conjunction with the, parallel development team, the BAs, and then some people from the services team, just to sort of make sure that we're all sort of in agreement that it makes sense to make these changes. And I think that, as people get more used to these ideas, it'll be more clear, obviously, what that this is a no-brainer change. Another one may be, we think we need a new one, we're not really sure, but we need to make this, we're trying to solve this problem. How would we sort of go ahead and solve that problem? This process, will hopefully move more quickly, and it'll be more clear on certain changes. And then, other ones maybe a little bit back and forth discussions about, well, what's the best way to actually handle this situation? But again, similarly, once it's sort of been approved and everybody agrees that these make sense, then, we would, again, document them, we configure them, and we would verify that, that they're actually been configured properly so that they're in the source code, they're in the tree, and everybody's happy with the way they're now working, and we should be able to resolve them. And eventually, then, again, communicate it out to make sure everybody knows about all the new types and states, instead of it being, because we're going to have a bunch of parallel development teams, and there's going to be a lot of overlap even within the same objects. And so, if one team sort of adds a new type, the other teams need to know about what's going on, because it may mean that they need to react to that, and they need to sort of make some changes to their code in order to make their, their system, their part of the system, still continue to working properly. So that's what we're looking at as the two basic processes. And then if you just sort of go back up to the top here, you can sort of see these are the steps in the states that the process might go through, the steps and how you might sort of do that, and sort of who would be responsible for that.
You just want to scroll down quickly to the what I call the status. I purposely didn't call it states, because to talk about states, the types and states, is just too confusing. But after I did this, so if you go all the way down
down to the very bottom. There we go.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So,
there we go.
And I'll leave you to review this. We're not going to walk through it. But I just want to highlight that coming up with these states is exactly, or the status is exactly the process that a BA would use to come to states. I mean, it's really about thinking about, well, what makes sense. I mean, it was this perfect exercise, and there's no science to it. It's a bit of an art. You take a stab at it. You say, well, I think we want to indicate that it's in draft. I don't really care that I don't want people looking at it yet. Well, when I really want to make sure that we realize that we want people to review it, I'm going to change it to under review, and then once we've decided that we like it, we're going to change it to approved. Do we also want to capture that we thought about it and we didn't like it, so we don't end up doing the same work over again at some point? Yeah, that's probably a good idea.
So
so it's really the exact same exercise that you will go through in creating states. It's just thinking and iterating on that thinking, and then you'll realize, oops, we missed one. So there's really, again, there's no magic to it, but it's really, I think, you really do this all the time, and maybe you don't even realize you're doing it. So I should have left this as a homework assignment for you guys to come up with states for states and types. But and just to note that we realized that through the change process, you probably would want to indicate somehow whether it was a modification or if it was a brand new type and state. Because if it's a modification, that means it's already configured, it's in the system, and now we want to modify it, and that probably is more important for, it's important to sort that out then versus it's just a brand new one. So again, that's just the kind of thinking that it's just iterative thinking, no magic.
And I want to reiterate here that we have the idea of the configured from curriculum management and configured from course slice. And I want to really especially stress the ones that are configured in curriculum management, that if at all possible, we're trying not to make changes to them. And this is because anybody with the the current implementation of curriculum management, it means not just changing sort of these types and states, but it also means going back and changing all of their their objects that have these types and states in them, and having going into their database and fixing them. So it's just it's a higher bar for making that decision. And so, I sort of have adopted in my mind the doctor's thing. First, do no harm. Don't make extra work for anybody who's trying to upgrade or from the curriculum management release to this new enrollment release. Try to make it as simple as possible. So, but having said that, if we need to actually make changes to them, and I did find in a few cases where we did, then where they were just badly thought through, they were mixing up ideas and had to split them apart. You go ahead and do that. But there is a certain amount of inertia that should be or heft that should be applied to them. All right.
And the other point on that is those statuses are really more in the definition process to help us understand whether they're already configured.
Yeah.
By the time it goes to the PDT, it should just be labeled configured. You shouldn't be so concerned about when it got configured, and that's really more for the core. So we just figure it's important information when we're thinking about the definition process, less relevant once you get to PDT.
Right. So. Okay. Are there questions on this process here, on the change process or the initial creation process?
Norm, I would just maybe go to the service, go one page up and show them where the information is also laid out in your table of contract changes.
What do you mean? Oh, there we go.
Click. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So it's also down here. Where is it? Type state changes. So it's sort of also this is this is the page that we've had for quite a while, which says well, what happens during parallel development if we if the parallel development team needs a change to the contract, and that includes type state changes. And so there's contract changes, type state changes, and implementation changes. And so what we did is we sort of revisited this section here and made it more clear and made it aligned to the diagrams that we put out there. But again, it describes it. It talks about how to file a JIRA, this whole page, how to file a JIRA, et cetera. So, all right.
This may be a tough question. Do you have a feel for how long a change would take to go through this process?
You mean a change request?
Yeah, let's say we need a type edit.
Right. I mean, I'm guessing if it's non-controversial, or we look at it and we go, yeah, that's just a type we need to add, then it shouldn't take more than a day or two.
Okay. Cool. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, our goal is to move these things fast, and sort of also that's what I sort of tried to explain earlier. I think that we're going to find out as we move along here which ones are going to be really easy and they're going to be no-brainers, and it'll be more like, hey, we're adding this type, just make sure it makes sense, and we go, okay, looks good, go, that kind of a thing. As opposed to, I think there will be other ones where it's, you're going to know, the parallel development team is going to know that there's needs some support and thought process on how to do this stuff. It's not just going to be, simply we already know we need to add some more holidays. I mean, that's almost no, that's not going to be controversial. We have these other holidays to add in, but there's going to be other situations where you're trying to make distinctions and it's not clear exactly how to do it. So, okay, all right. Well, what I'm going to do now is sort of, again, give you a sense of more, just give you a more visceral sense. Like, Carol said, this is an art, not a science. And so what I wanted to do was to actually, walk you through some of those, some of the steps that we've gone through and to actually do this kind of work, because it really is helpful. Now, I know that, it's been really cool because sometimes, we've done this work and then we've actually sat down and talked with the BAs, and they've sort of come up with similar kinds of types and states, and so it's like, yay, we're all on the same wavelength, which is a nice thing to do. But again, it's just to give you an idea of sort of the thought process involved, so you get a better idea of it. So when I said that we create entity diagrams for all of our services, and so this may describe it. This is the entity diagram from the appointment service, And just a quick refresher for, if you remember, the blue boxes are the main objects that are in the system. The red objects are objects that are in the service. So this is the appointment service. The red objects are objects that are in other services but are related to this service. And the sort of the yellowish type boxes are type objects. And since we have a separate color for them because we want them to, in some blend into the background. We don't really even want to see them. And so, what we do, and this is actually when we design these things, we start putting the types out here, and we start just listing some ideas that we think that they might be. And so in this example, when I took this snapshot of it, you can sort of see, well, there's this thing called a slot type. Well, geez, what might that be? What kind of a type might be in it? So maybe it's a closed or an open slot, or maybe it's a single or recurring. Maybe there's multiple occurrences of this actual appointment, and it's one of those kind of things. Or you go down to the actual appointment type. Well, it's a registration appointment, which is what we're really trying to do. That's the the goal of this particular service right now. But we're hoping, again, by using the types, that we could use the same model to actually do maybe advisor appointments or other types of class meetings and stuff. And so again, we just list them out there, just given that, so people looking at the diagram have some sense of what we're talking about when we say what this window is and whatnot. And you can see in what these objects are. So you can see the appointment window. The types that we see there are, it's a maybe it was a slotted, maybe non-slotted, and then maybe it's a one where there's one slot for the entire window. And so when we actually morph this around, this actually ended up aligning pretty well to the to what the business was thinking about. So when we actually joined it matched up pretty well. But that's sort of the way we think about it. We just started saying, well, what might that be? Then what we do is we actually look at the data. We try to jump in and see any example data, because as I said, if it turns off, if types turn on and off fields, well, then you really want to see, well, are there certain instances of these things where they actually have different fields. And so in this particular case, when we look at appointment windows, this is the example. Can people sort of see this? And so very quickly you can sort of see here that way out to the right, in these rows here, which represent records, they have these whole set of fields filled in, whereas these ones don't. They're all blank. And so immediately it sort of just jumps out at you and sort of say, well, you know what? These guys up here, I don't know who's telling me, but don't. These ones here, right? These rows here, these ones up here, are a different type than the ones down here. Just you can sort of see that. So again, that's just sort of the way when we look at it, we sort of think about that and we go, oh, all right, we have different types here. At least we can put something in to look at that. So again, we look at the data. I don't have an example for states, but if you actually look at some of the process flow diagrams, when you sort of see things, you sort of start seeing states jump out at you. Sort of almost certain times you operate on the object and then you say it's this and this, and you can just read them and you sort of see those words pop out at you. So that's sort of how we do states too, looking at the artifacts. And then what we do is we actually put them out on the wiki and mark them. So we can sort of, this is what we were saying before, is you sort of mark them out put them on the wiki, and you can sort of, as you said, okay, we put a key in here for them, and we try to define a key, and I'll get into a few minutes in about what this thing ought to look like here. But you have a name, and then you have a description, and then very important, one thing that we found is very important to get agreement on is to start putting in what this is, what other people do. So. And then, if you can, you have examples, you have maybe example data. Now, this is just an example that it's everyone does it this way except UW, sort of, or something like that. But the idea here is, there's that manual type that we talked about sort of got added in. And so you have a manual window where you can actually create a one-off appointment. So the alias for the manual is, a one-off appointment. And so it gives other people looking at these types a way of sort of saying, oh, I don't call it that, but we have that thing still. We do have that at our school. So you can sort of, if you walk through the different things, oh, that's the example, manual one-off. So shared or one slot per window. So that's the idea. You sort of we highlight it in here, and so people can look at that. We can actually sort of go through the process a little bit. And similarly, you can look at the appointment.
Just to note, the agreed upon, that will become status. That column is meant to be status. And Norm and I just finalized sort of the process, the definition process and the change process, and so the dedicated core BA, that assignment is still TBD, but that person will be responsible for going through all the service pages and, updating and making sure whatever status. So if it's, cleaning things up so that when you get it in PDT, everything will be lined up, but we just haven't had a chance to do that work yet. I think the alias, just to underscore, particularly for PDT BAs, you may think, oh, we don't have this type, the type isn't there, and then, to Norm's point, you go and you look and you see the alias, and you go, oh, okay, well, maybe it is a little different than what I was thinking, or it's broader. So I think that's why the change process is important, that there's a little bit more monitoring going on initially, just to make sure people understand and are looking at the documentation correctly, and then we'll probably loosen the reins a little bit as we move through parallel development.
Mm-hmm. And then see the ones that we've had strike-throughs on, again, that's an example of sort of showing how, this was something that was actually reviewed, discussed, and decided that we didn't want to do it. But it's a way of documenting that we did not want a type called that because it's not an operation that we wanted to do, or it's not a type that we wanted to support. But at least it then documents that it was a thought process that went through, and we actually tried to make that decision. Similarly, we did the appointment windows, the states, and so you might have in this case, life cycle for appointment windows. In this case, the appointment windows and the appointment slots, they all have just one. They're fairly straightforward. There's one life cycle or set of states that go to each object. They're not different depending on the overall object, at least not yet that we've seen. But you may find in parallel development that there may be a need for that. But so we just sort of said, well, for this, all we have is draft and assigned. The window states. We didn't really need, lots of other detailed information about that, maintaining whether it's confirmed or not. So again, the idea here is that we just sort of do that, and this is sort of the life cycle here. And so again, it could be that you'd have multiple life cycles for a single appointment window, but it's in this case, we're not doing that. Let me see, what else? All right.
Quick question for you, Norm.
Sure.
When you're looking at things that have been discarded, is the rationale or the decision-making process documented anywhere? So if I wanted to research why, so that I don't,
I think that's what we're trying to do in the notes and comments, but I'm not sure we actually have always been perfect about that. But yeah, that's what we're trying to do. All right. So again, we post them out here for everybody to be able to look at and read, and the idea is to make it straightforward for everybody to see and to understand, and so everybody knows where to go to look at them and find them. That's really important. So that's sort of the next stage, and then we review them with the BAs, and then we have to actually. I'm gonna jump a little bit here. The actual key, that actual string, and that's what I would. If I can sort of show you here. This thing right here, kuali.appointment.window.type.slotted.uniform, that may not make a lot of difference to a business analyst, but it makes the world difference to the programmer. And so, because this is the thing that actually gets embedded in the code somewhere. And in fact, sort of the way we're envisioning it, eventually an implementing institution could rename the name of it. So when it gets displayed on the screen, they could call it something else, right? They could actually have the name and the description say whatever they wanted, long term. If they didn't want to call it uniform or they wanted to call it automatic, they could rename the name when they got it to their school, and it would say, okay, the choice here is automatic, as opposed to one. Or shared, they might have liked the aliases instead, and they would just put them into the name field and go on. But it's this thing here that is actually embedded in code for, as I said, for all the rules, for the selection criteria, for the for all the manipulations that we've got to do on these things. it's this key that is often the one that's embedded. So there's a couple of rules about forming that key, and that's what we've got documented here. It's actually been out in the service templates and conventions for a long time. So, and this is, a little bit more for techies, but just want to get it quick to the raw. Should be in lowercase, and there's a couple of things. They should be, unique across all of the types and states, and there's other things here. But the main one for business analysts is sort of the Kuali dot prefix. Is the Kuali dot prefix. The intention here is that if it has Kuali dot, then it's a type that sort of everybody agreed upon, and it all sort of means the same thing, and we can get some interoperability around that. So the system should work for everybody if they agree that that's the same thing. But if you come up with institutional, when they actually implement it in your own institution, you come up with yet another type, and you know that it's idiosyncratic just to your school, then you can put in USC.xxx or Berkeley.xxx, and you can sort of define your own types too. And similarly, during parallel development, and you're talking about a particular reference institution, you could do a similar thing where you could sort of start and just say, well, this is specific to the reference implementation, the reference institution, and so what we know it's specific, but we are, designing for that reference institution, so we're going to call it ref.xxx. So it's really, just to give you a sense, it's a sort of way of qualifying it so people know quickly, by just looking at that first prefix, what is the level of agreement in general on this thing.
Yeah,
so
let's clarify that. Let's pause there and clarify that point, because again, this is important, I think, for the PDTBAs. When we're coming, if you identify a need for a new type, the idea should be to try to make it as generalizable as possible, right? And so they would almost always get the Kuali prefix. There will be, given the fact that we are focused on a reference implementation that is based on the UW, there will be cases where a type may be required that really is very specific to the reference implementation, right? I mean, one can envision that scenario. And so those would be the ones that you would prefix as ref. And again, to Norm's point, the reason for that is so when we ship the product, it's easy for an implementing institution to look at our types and rip out the ones that they know they're not going to need, that are very specific to the reference implementation. So that's the thinking behind that. So step number one, the goal should always be make it as generalizable and universal as possible. If that's not possible, then clearly identify it as being part of the reference implementation.
Excellent.
Any questions on that? Okay. We haven't really bumped into that yet because, holidays, pretty much everybody celebrates Christmas. But, I'm sure we'll run into it, as we get into more nuanced aspects of the applications.
Mm-hmm. Then the only thing to note, I want to note on this conventions is that, again, when I say R1, it's the curriculum management ones. So the types that were initially designed and implemented and configured and during curriculum management don't all follow this pattern. In particular, most of them do start with Kuali, and most of them do follow most of the rules, but they didn't follow a consistency for the case. So they'll have mixed case especially in the ending part. And there even are some though that they're out there that don't even start with Kuali, because there was. In case you're not sure, and I'm going to get to another slide that talks about this, the control and the management of these types in states was, let's just say, there's a lot to be desired during curriculum management, and it led to a lot of churn. But in any case, we did not change them. We did not sort of go, oh, now that we're in enrollment, we're changing them. Like I said, I tried to leave things alone so that the implementing institutions wouldn't have to sort of go in and do massive changes on all their existing curriculum management stuff just to integrate with the new enrollment stuff. Okay. So then when I say, we say configure or translate or put them into the source code tree, we really mean two different things. And this is more technical, but I just want you to understand that there's two different things that we're doing here. One is what we call Java constants, and the other one are SQL insert statements. They both are used by the programmers in different situations in order to do the work that the business analysts say we wanted to have done. So if you want to get, let's say, a list of the types to display on the screen, that would involve the SQL insert statement. But if you say you want to configure drop date, instead of the programmer coding, the actual string drop date, they would actually just reference this thing called a constant. And everywhere that you would ever want to say reference drop date, it would be referencing that constant file. And it makes it, from a programming standpoint, really easy to manage and maintain. And we have files for that. I just give you, wait a minute, I'm trying to think. Do it? Yeah. Oh, so I wanted to give you examples, but I'm not sure. I'm going to flip. Yeah, there we go. I'll go back to that other slide here. So this actually is an example of the constants. You don't have to understand this. You don't have to know it, but it's just this is an example of a constants file, and so you can sort of see it gives it like an uppercase name like that, and let me make it higher. Make it bigger so you can sort of see that. Make it bigger.
We're all leaning into our computers here.
So hope you can see that. So you can sort of. Oh, here we go again. All right. So you can sort of see that this is the actual string key, and that's really important to have that. But this is actually what is then referenced in the code is this thing here by the programmer. And so once this is built, they can just reference this thing, and it always points to that string in the system. So again, just wanted to point out, just so you see it when somebody says what it is, you can say, oh yeah, that's what it is. It's those things, public static final stuff. So that's that. Then the SQL insert statements look something like this. Again, you don't need to understand them. It's just the same idea, but it's taking the same, sort of string value. This actually is from another one. This is from the process service, but sort of you can sort of put different pieces together, and you can sort of put them into the tables that sort of match. So these are actually process service. I just want to go back now. I should have probably done it a little bit here. Just a little history, and this is just going to be quick, just so you understand how far we've come. And I know there's still been some confusion around these things, and I hope we're going to get it in good shape. But there's been some changes that have gone on in how we sort of manage types and states during curriculum management process, and during course life, and now during the initial PDT, and now when we're trying to do things for the new PDT. For the next round of PDTs. And so there's a little bit of change in terms of that, but it's also sort of changes in terms of how the services are operate on them entirely. A lot of this gets a little techy, so I'm not trying to get into the details of that. But the more important thing to talk about from a process standpoint is that during curriculum management, during this whole process, no one really tried to manage or control any of these types of states until really late in the game. And it was only when I was asked to handle the dictionary, and I said, well, the dictionary has a big impact on types and states. What are the types and states? And some people said, I don't know. And so we went back and I had to go back, and I sort of tried to then start getting some control very late in the game in terms of being able to define these locally, have everybody get agreement on them, and try to manage them, put some standards around them, and all that kind of stuff. And so it was very late in the game to getting that done. And then just to how we stored them, we used to store these things in different places depending on the object, and during course life we were actually doing it by the service, and now we're just having a central service that manages all the types and states. And this is technical, but it makes it simpler. We'll be able to go to one place and say these are all the types used throughout the system, all of Kuali. These are the states that are used throughout the system, all of Kuali. So the idea is that we're trying to get a little better handle around them, and then and we were able to, we think we've got a better approach, and we think we've got, by centralizing all this and making them clear, it's going to make it easier for everybody in the long run. We're actually hoping to make it possible for BAs to be able to just enter in some of these SQL statements directly. And I'm not saying you have to type in those weird strings, but be able to maybe have some KRAD screens or some other mechanism that allow you to be able to type this information, and we'll be able to generate the SQL statements for you. If we can get that done, that would be really a big win, because it really should, the ownership, the wording, all that stuff really belongs in the BA's hands. It doesn't belong in the developer's hands at all. And it really doesn't belong in the service team's hands either. So it's just a matter of sort of getting it in the right place and getting it so that you all can actually do a lot of that work on your own a lot more. And sort of just having some, making sure we still do that process of getting agreement is really what still is the important part. So it isn't just people creating types like in curriculum management where there were developers who said, they were told, you have to have a type here because it's required, and they didn't know what to put in there, so they just invented a type and stuck it in, just so the program would work. But then you're sort of looking at it and you go, don't even know what it is or what it's used for or what the meaning of it is. So we're hoping to sort of, I guess it was like, it was wide open, then we sort of constricted it down, and we're trying to open it back up again now that, to allow, the right people to actually manage these things.
Hey, Norm, maybe you're going to talk about it, but so this gets at that step of configure and also the step of verify. I know eventually we're moving to having a UI to create types.
Right.
Is that where you're going?
Yes, that's what I was trying to say there is sort of in this final step, we're trying to come up with some sort of UI to be able to manage those things. Oh,
sorry. Okay. I really was listening. So I guess what I'm going to ask the PDTBAs to recognize is that exactly what is involved right now with quote-unquote configuration and verification and those steps. It's probably going to be more of a collaborative effort between development and services and yourselves for the time being, with the goal of eventually having a UI that you can kind of fully do that, but we're not there yet, right? Okay.
Bingo.
So just point of clarification there. Thank you, Norm.
Okay. Well, I think actually I'm almost done here because actually I'm just talking about, here's a reference to the type service. So if you actually want to understand sort of what it is that we're doing, how it's connected, so here's the type service, and feel free to manipulate that. You can sort of, the type service itself has types, but you have a type and you can have relationships between types, and that's how we do the groupings that we've talked about. So there's a type can be connected to a relationship which links two types together in a particular way, so that's the type service. And again, I'm not going to try to run through everything here, but you can sort of look through that. You can look at the actual contract. You can sort of see what operations can be done on the types. You can sort of see that you can get it by that ref object URI. So that's how you might say, get me all the types for a course offering. What are all the valid types for a course offering? What are the types for this particular group? So you may specify this when you specify a group, and you would say, okay, this is the holiday group, and give me all the types that match that are holidays for milestones that are holidays. And then the allowed types is sort of a similar thing, but it allows you, it's the ones where you have types that constrain other types. So in the case of like fall term, is constrained to only have, let's say, the first half, the two mini-masters, underneath it. So the subterms that can be associated with it would be, let's say, the first half of the fall and second half of the fall. But in spring, it's the first half of the spring semester and the second half of the spring semester mini-masters, and then maybe a spring semester, a spring break little experiential learning term, which is not really a term, but it's a little tiny mini thing where some professor wants to teach a course during that time period. And so you can set up the constraints in the allowed to say that I want to only if it's the spring term, then the only kinds of subterms that can be allowed are the two spring mini masters plus that spring break one. If it's fall, it's the two fall mini masters that you can pick and configure when you're setting up for that particular term. So that's what we're using the relationships for, and so you have the grouping and you have the allowed types that you can do, and then you can manipulate them doing different other methods. And then the state contract is similar. Just wanted to. So again, there's that diagram that I was showing earlier, and it's pretty straightforward. Again, if you look at the contract, you can sort of see. You can get the different life cycles. You can get the life cycles for a particular object. You can get the states by the life cycle. So you can say, give me all the states that are in there and whatnot. And so it's just a way of sort of getting the list of types and states and I mean, the states that are defined as valid or allowed during, for that for that configuration for that object. And you can skip the mock info because that's really more for the techies. And then just a quick recap again. You define the object identity diagrams. You look at example data. You sort of sort them all naturally. You sort of just get that sense. And it's a science, not a. I mean, it's an art, not a science. You have to post them somewhere so we can get agreement on them. Everybody gets to review them, and then we translate them into artifacts. And that's sort of the process we're trying to follow here in general. At least we've been, and we're hoping to sort of continue similar like that, but with more heavy BA involvement. Tips and tricks. I'm going to skip that. That's something that's maybe more focused on sort of how you can actually manipulate some of these types and states and create the artifacts out of them. And